So our next guest, we're moving right along. Our next guest has a new book out, and Nancy Johnson. She's been on the show before, with her previous book, and so she's back with her brand new book. She does historical fiction, and uh, I have my copy that I got already. So I haven't
Yay.
read it yet. In fact, it just arrived today. I was hoping it would arrive before the show because it said it was getting here tomorrow. But then when the package got here today, I was like, great, I can show that it's called People of Means.
Yes, yes.
It's
So glad
pretty
you got it.
cool. You have
Yeah.
cutouts on your cover too.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
See, I'm just messing
No,
with
that's
Gwen because
just the camera, the way
Oh,
the
I'm
yeah.
camera
just
showed it. It does look like that. And you know why? Because it's green. And when you have a green screen,
right.
anything green ends up being invisible.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know why that was
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I used to do my talk show once upon a time in front of a green screen, and I would always have to tell my guests because I did it in studio, and I
Yep,
would
make sure you
always have to
wear.
tell
Yep,
them, do not wear green. You can wear anything you want, but do not wear green.
right. That's smart.
Yeah, I did this early on with this show. I wore something green, like it can be green, but it can't be the same color green as
Right.
the green screen.
Right,
So
right.
I had it on, and I had to change clothes like really quickly before the show went live because when I did turn the camera on, you couldn't see it. It was weird,
Right,
really
right.
weird. But anyway, Nancy, welcome back to Black Authors Matter TV.
Yeah, it's so good to be back. Yeah, I'm glad you remember that I was here before and talked about
Yeah,
Behind This Lie when it came out, 2021. Yeah,
yeah, and that's been 4 almost 4 years ago now,
it has
It's
been.
crazy how much time
isn't
flies,
it?
doesn't it?
Isn't it? Isn't
Oh,
it?
I know.
So, The People of Means is your brand new book. It came out February
February
11th.
11th. Hmm.
So, and I saw online that, and this is really interesting because there was a Black History event with four historical fiction authors, including you, that took
Yeah.
place on February 1st. It was virtual, I believe,
Yes, it was virtual.
and all four of you have been on the show or are going to be on the show. So you're on tonight. Shara Moon was on a few
Yeah.
weeks ago, like 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
Victoria Christopher Murray will be on April 1st,
Yes.
and Lauren
And
will
Lauren
be on. Her name is Lauren Sharma. There's
Sharma.
a hyphenated last name.
Yes.
She'll be on, I think, March 18th.
Oh, wow. So it's so nice to have all of us on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how?
Victoria discovered that all of us had books coming out in the same month and decided let's all talk to kick off Black History Month. So that was really nice.
That's
Right. How,
awesome.
how did your event? Now this wasn't the event. I don't want to insert something that wasn't the event. But this wasn't the event where there was a challenge
There
of
was,
some
yeah, yep,
kind.
there was somebody who interrupted it. It was,
It was a
yeah,
Zoom, was it a Zoom bomb?
it was a, yep, yep, it definitely was. It was horrible.
Yeah,
And so that
I
person
remember
interrupted
seeing
us
her
twice.
talking about that.
Yeah, yeah. So that was, but we were like, you know what? They're going to try it, but we're going to keep going and no one's going to, interrupt what we are trying to do. And so we continued and
Yeah.
persevered in spite of. But yeah, that
And
And
they
it
is the
wound
also
up
event.
have,
being very successful.
Yeah, yeah. So people who needed to be there were there. People, rejoined, came back, and we were able to finish the conversation.
yeah, some
But
people have too much time on their hands.
they do.
You know, or they just don't have enough to do, well, which is the same thing. you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
there's all kinds of things you could do, a person could do.
Yeah.
And trying to interrupt someone else's event is just
Hmm.
silly.
Yeah.
But People of Means, tell us about it. What is
Okay.
what is it about?
Yeah. So, People of Means is a story of an upper middle class Black mother and daughter, both of them coming of age at different times of social reckoning in America. So, the mom, Frida, is a student at Fisk University in 1959. She arrives there from Chicago and is really introduced to the indignities of the Jim Crow South for the first time. And then 3 decades later, her daughter Tulip is a young public relations professional in 1992 in Chicago at the time of the acquittal of the 4 officers for the beating of Rodney King. So you've got this mother and daughter, each of them trying to balance their pursuit of justice with their personal ambitions. And so that's the
Wow.
story. Yeah.
That's a
Now,
different.
is it kind of a flashback type thing, or is it more of a
You
linear
see
type
both. It's
story?
more linear. You see both at, yeah, yep. So you see the mother in the late 50s, early 60s, and then we have chapters, we jump forward to her daughter, and then we see the mother there too, as an older woman, and then you meet her daughter, and you see what she's grappling with. And so it's really a nice juxtaposition of the two, the mother and daughter, and the
Right.
similarities in their journeys and struggles, and then some of the differences. And, I really want to explore different ideas about what it means to resist, because they're both really exploring resistance. And yeah, so I wanted to really look at that across generations and across time periods.
Hmm.
I
So
like
what
I
what
like that.
gave you the idea to create these characters with the storyline and the
Yeah, the inspiration
similarities
behind it. Yeah.
and
So
the
I was
intergenerational aspect of it?
Yeah, well, I was inspired by the events of the summer of 2020 with the murder of George Floyd. And at that point, I saw so many people engaging in resistance, from different walks of life, race, ethnicity, different backgrounds. And so I was curious about that. What really is it that sparks people to activism? And then a few months after the murder of George Floyd, Representative John Lewis died. And to me, he's always been this larger than life icon, right? Civil rights icon. But I watched a documentary about his life after he passed, and they were talking about him being a student, being 19 years old, in
Right,
college,
right.
and yet
Very young.
leading these sit-ins at these five and dimes, at these lunch counters. And I kept thinking I was really intrigued by that and wondering, what's it like for a young person at that age when you're really just trying to get your class schedule together, your syllabus, you're trying to study, date, make friends, all the things that we do when you're, young and in college, in the beginning of your college career. But how do you also lead a movement that changes the world at the same time? And so that's how the character of Frida was born, the character who we meet in the late 50s, early 60s. And then the other time period was sparked by my own activism when I was a student in college. And so in 1992, I was a student, junior in college, and that was my first time marching. Was about the Rodney King
Right.
verdict. Yeah. But in this story, I decided not to make Tulip a college student. I decided to have her be a young public relations professional because at that time in her life, the stakes are higher in terms of whether she's going to engage in activism or not. She has a budding career on the line and she's trying to advance at this firm where she's working in public relations. So much more at stake for her if she gets involved. So not only pressure from her family to not really engage in this, but also, how much is she going to do on company time and what's that going to mean for her career trajectory?
Hmm. So that's an interesting angle. Now, are either of
Yeah.
them married?
Married, yeah. Well, when you meet, Tulip is not married. She has a love interest though. She has a boyfriend, and so I'm exploring again race and class. So he's black like she is, but he's a city bus driver. Her boyfriend, right? And she's a public relations professional. So you've got a bit of a divide there, class wise, and they have very different ideas about activism. So she's kind of thinking, yeah, I cannot stand what just happened with this verdict. I need to do something. That's her perspective. And then she's got her boyfriend, Key, and he's saying, you Tulip have the privilege of being able to engage in activism. I'm just trying to make ends meet, pay my bills, and you're trying to get me and my parents involved in this. My father had been in prison. My mother been working, at a school cafeteria. Now they're entrepreneurs. They're trying to make a living. They can't afford to get involved in this kind of thing. And so there's that tension there between that romantic pairing. And then the mother, Frida, when we meet her in the late 50s, early 60s, she's a student at Fisk University, and she's not married, but she's torn between two love interests. So there's a love triangle in that storyline. And so one is this saxophone playing budding activist, kind of like a John Lewis type. So he's caught her eye, and then her other love interest is the one that her parents have chosen for her, and that's Gerald, who's a student at Meharry Medical College. So he's going to be a physician.
You put all of the schools in there. I mean, all of these schools are so important to African American history. So it's very interesting that you chose these specific schools to highlight in the story.
Yeah. I thought, I mean, they're such a big part of our history and our tradition. And I talk about that in the book, some of the traditions of these kinds of institutions. And that's part of what's weighing on Frida, is she knows that, her parents went to Fisk, they met at Fisk, and they've talked to her about this storied tradition of this esteemed institution and what it means to be a student at Fisk. And so she's thinking, there's all this this history and this tradition. I can't mess that up by getting involved in activism. And her parents are telling her, focus on your studies. We've sent you to the best. Don't get sullied by this activism, this organizing.
Right.
So she's got a decision to make.
There are a lot of layers in this story. I mean, there's like stories within a story within a story. How are you able to strike the balance between all of this information that you're probably wanting to include, but you still have a main story to tell? How are you able to strike that balance?
Yeah. So I try to do as much research as I can, get as much information, but this was my first foray into historical fiction. And so I was very careful not to just pack in every piece of history.
And it's easy to want to do that. Like, oh, this is cool. I need to include that.
I need to put that in there. But I have to stay focused on the story that I'm trying to tell. And it's really about these two women and how they're going to answer the call or not answer the call to activism. It's like they're two young women who are thrown into this huge moment in history, and what are they going to do about that? And so that was my focus. Also, the love stories. I needed to make sure that I was weaving that throughout, and that there was an outcome to that in terms of, with Frida, which man is she going to choose, and the choices she has to make are very much connected with the choice she has to make about activism, right? And so that's why I gave her two love interests who are pulling her in two very different directions when it comes to the choice around engaging in activism. So that's the way I did it. I just kept, staying true to the story that I wanted to tell, and making sure that any details that I put in there are going to be in service of the story that I'm trying to tell. But the details were so important. So it wasn't just what I read. I'm a former journalist, so I interviewed several women who are in their 80s now, who were students at Fisk at that time when Frida was. Yeah, and so I interviewed them, and I wanted the details from them down to, what did you wear to class, right? Because he told me there were some professors you had to wear a skirt or a dress. You had to wear pantyhose in some professors' classes. I wanted to know that because even though it's fiction, I wanted the story to feel authentic, right?
Absolutely.
So if you went there, you'd be like, oh yeah. And I've talked to several people who graduate, alums, since the book has been out, and they were like, wow, it was like you were following me around at Fisk. So it felt like it was authentic. And one of the people I interviewed was the late, great Nikki Giovanni, the author.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so that was tremendous. I hate that she didn't get a chance to read the book, but
so you've been working on this story for quite a while.
I have been. Yeah, it's been several years, that I've been working on it.
Yeah, it's if you have too much history, then a book becomes a history book and not historical fiction. So, you have to.
Yeah, and then it becomes didactic too. And then people are like, oh, you're trying to preach
trying to
to
preach,
me or
yeah.
teach
Right.
and all of that. And really,
Right.
it's a story. I want you to be entertained, but also learn something along the way and make you think, and ask yourself some tough questions.
Yeah, a lot of the people involved in the civil rights movement were very, very young. There's a book called The Children,
The
and I
children.
can't remember the name of the author. It was a white author. I
Okay.
read it, I want to say 20 years ago. I have to look it up. But it was all about the children in the civil rights movement.
Mm.
The people who were running it and planning it and marching and demonstrating and going to jail, almost all of them were children. They were high schoolers and college students.
Yeah.
And, when you're that age, you are very idealistic
Yeah.
and fearless.
And
You know,
fearless. Yes. Yes. You
Fearless
think
is a good way to put it.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you really are. But the one thing I discovered, I think a lot of people have the misconception, though, that if you were Black in those days, you were automatically involved in the movement, but you weren't. I mean, because there was the
No.
danger of it,
Hmm.
this was
Well,
dangerous work, you had
Yeah.
the fire bombings and you had all kinds of things that were happening.
right. I recently learned though that just as you said, not every Black person was a part of the movement, and not because they were scared. I met a man who told me, and I'm never gonna forget what he said. His friends, when he was younger, he's 90 years old now, but he
Yeah.
remembered his friends saying, "Join the movement." He said, "I'm not about to mess up your movement." He said, "Those white people have one time to spit on me, and I'm gonna mess the whole movement
Oh,
up."
he said, I can't get down with all that nonviolence and
Right. So he was like, let me just
oh,
stay over here. I support y'all from here.
yep, yep, yep. He's like, I
Look,
know
I'll get
myself.
y'all out of jail.
Yep, I'm not the one. So yeah,
Right.
that's true too. And then I interviewed a
Mhm.
woman who said she was from a small town in Tennessee, Murfreesboro. And I include her story
Oh,
a bit in there, fictionalized version, but she said she had parents who were elementary school teachers in that small town in Tennessee. And she said they were like, you can't get involved in that because we will lose our jobs if
Yeah.
It
if
was
they find
tied to
out
livelihoods.
that that we have a child who's doing that. And so I incorporated that. One of Frida's best friends
Mm.
is from, her name is Cora. She's from Murfreesboro, and I have her dealing with that, with parents who are teachers, and there's a threat of them losing their jobs.
I found the author's name for that book, The
Oh,
Children,
yeah,
because I looked it up on Amazon. It was gonna bother me.
yeah. Okay.
David Halberstam. And
David.
he's written a lot of other books. He doesn't write on, Black issues or civil rights issues. I don't know if he's still alive. I don't want to call him dead. But he was older when he wrote this book. And
Yeah.
it's been out, I want to say 20, it was 20 years ago when I read this book. But very fascinating. This is a
Yeah.
fascinating account of the people who were at the forefront, like
Yes.
John Lewis.
Right.
They
Diane
were
Nash.
all,
And
yes,
I mentioned as
they were
well.
all very, very young. So, and then the people who, as you were saying, the people who were involved in the movement, or not everybody wanted to be involved for a variety of reasons. Some of
Right.
them, it was just fear because
Yeah.
they were lynching people.
So I said it was dangerous work. It
Yes, it
wasn't,
was very
it wasn't an
dangerous.
easy thing. Everybody didn't want to risk that.
Right.
Hmm.
And
And
so,
then I have the parents in my book, Frida's parents, as I indicated already, saying, we sent you there to get your education. And they believe that that's how you resist, that's how you lift your community, is by
Right.
being excellent and doing well, getting a good job, right? And then if we, are become the pillars of the community because of the kinds of work we do, the profession that we have, that will lift the rest of the community along with us. And they felt that was the way to do it. And they also wanted Black folks to lean on the legacy Black organizations, like the NAACP and those types of organizations. Like, let them handle it in their way. You don't need to be out there physically organizing and putting your life on the line and causing a ruckus.
well,
Mm. The ruckus.
as it turns
Yeah.
out in historically, the movement people helped the NAACP
Yes, they did.
because they were considered to be by many white people to be more reasonable.
Right.
So you had the Stokely Carmichael with the SNCC, and then you had the SCLC, and they would butt heads too with each other because they had different approaches.
They
You know,
did. They
SNCC,
did. You
they
had the
went
young people
they went
pushing those
nonviolent.
older organizations too to do more,
Yeah,
to be, it was, yeah, they were
yeah.
really
It was
kind
it
of
was
nipping at their heels, really. Um,
yeah, but it really took all of it. It took all of the different approaches
you need all of them, right, to make it.
to
Yep,
make it happen.
totally agree. And I think it's timely to where we are today in terms of what are we going to do? We're thinking about resistance now.
Mhm.
So, when you look at the course of history, some of this is just a parallel, right? And I forget the Coretta Scott King quote, but she said something about every generation needing to fight to regain the rights that they had won already. And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And I think about like the 1860s, after the Civil War, we had the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment granting citizenship to formerly enslaved people, and then the 15th Amendment giving Black men the franchise, the right to vote. And then a century later, you've got the Civil Rights Movement where Black folks are still trying to regain those rights that had already been bestowed upon them, right?
Right.
And you
And a
look at
lot of
where we
people
are
don't
now.
know that Black women didn't get the vote when Black men got the vote.
Right, right. We did
They
not. That
didn't
was
get the
Black
vote
men,
until the women's suffrage.
women's suffrage movement,
And
right?
then we
Right.
had to
And
fight
even
white women.
then, we were right. Even then, white women didn't necessarily want us to be
Yeah, they
part
didn't
of
want us
that,
included.
right?
So we had to, everything is a fight almost.
All my life,
Uh,
it's
you know,
right. Yep. I'm sorry.
just a little bit.
Okay. I couldn't resist.
Yeah, you have to be willing, you have to be willing to fight for what you want. And you can fight in different ways. It doesn't,
Yeah, yeah.
it doesn't always have to be public or protest.
No,
Uh,
it didn't. That was one
Sometimes
thing
it
I
can
wanted to do
be,
with this book was you could do it. You have your own ways of doing it.
yes,
Yeah,
Mhm.
yes. Within institutions, you can be fighting the system and it never make the paper.
yeah.
Never made public.
Right,
Right,
right.
But
And you see
right.
that in my book too. Like you have to read it, but there's a
I plan
um
to read it.
you
This
gotta
is
read it.
on my
Okay.
list. This is
It's on your
on
list.
my list. It's
Yeah.
on my list.
Yeah, because there's something that Nikki Giovanni told me about with a particular Black entertainer, a very famous entertainer. And she said everybody doesn't know what his role was in the movement. And so he makes an appearance in the book, I'll just say, and performs.
Okay.
And we get to see a little bit about how he was, what his influence was during the movement. So, yeah, so that was fun to be able to insert those pieces of history that I found out from Nikki, and then I kept telling her, I said, "Oh my goodness, you give me all this hidden history. I'm gonna go look it up." And she said, "Child, you're not gonna find this in a history book."
Yes.
Like, okay, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of stuff doesn't make the history books. And I told people, you have to think about this, especially for the younger generations. If you Google something and you don't find it, does that mean it didn't happen? Because
Mm,
now people depend so much on Google.
you do.
Google doesn't capture everything, not even 10% of the things that have happened.
No,
It's only
no.
what's been put in there, and it's a
Yeah,
lot that's
But
not in there.
part of it you have to think about too is that many things made history because people thought to write them down or people thought to spread the word.
Mhm.
This is why for a long time people thought that Madam C.J. Walker was the first Black female millionaire, and she actually wasn't.
mm,
There was a woman who came before her, Annie Turnbull Malone, but people didn't talk about her as much as they talked about Madam C.J. Walker. So it's just in recent years people started learning more about Annie Turnbull Malone, and she
right.
actually was the one who started the school where Madam C.J. Walker learned.
Yeah, yeah. See, that's it. There's so much we don't know about our history, and,
Hmm.
and now we're at a point where folks are trying to, whitewash our history and remove some of our
Exactly.
history from what's being taught, So it's really up to us to be the carriers of the story, of the history.
Yeah,
So I take
absolutely.
that responsibility seriously to to play a small part in doing that.
Yeah, we've always had to tell our own stories though. Even when uh because I learned Black history from taking it. Well, let me say this. In elementary school, I had a teacher that was exceptional, and she
Okay.
made it part of the Black History Month. We had a program where we dressed up as different people from the past.
Oh,
She
nice.
really went all out. But after that, high school, I took a whole year of African American history. And
Oh,
so, and then I read a lot. We have to read ourselves.
we do. We
There's
do. We
no
have to be
rule that says you can't
responsible
read
for
yourself.
that. Right.
you know.
Right.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
reading is great. We just need more people to write down their history and spread their history.
Mhm.
Um, at the Black History Month Literary Weekend, one of my special guests was Dr. Regina Jennings, who's been on this show,
Okay.
and she talked about the Black Panther movement.
Mm,
And many people did not know a lot of the things that she talked about when it came to the Black Panthers. Many people thought of them as these gun-toting madmen who walked through the streets with berets on. And
right.
she said she thought that as well. But then
No, yeah.
when she got there and she joined the movement, the first thing they did was, instead of putting a gun in her hand, they put a book in her hand. And so
Mm,
a lot of people didn't realize that this is what they were about. They didn't know that the Black Panthers started the free lunch programs. And they didn't know that the Black Panthers were the ones who started free healthcare. But we don't know all of this until those stories are told.
I
So we just
told.
have to continue to tell our stories.
Right, right, right. Yep, I
Yeah.
agree. I didn't know
And
all that you just said. So I'm
yeah,
learning.
especially with younger generations, just because they're so well, on the one hand, they have the tool, they have their devices, but
Yeah,
um they have the information at their fingertips.
right,
But
right.
they have to be you have to create
Well,
the
Be
interest.
inquisitive
You
and to
have
be
to be
looking and
motivated to
seeking it
even
out.
seek it
Yeah,
out.
but this is why I think that stories like yours, Nancy, are important, because even though it's a fiction story,
yeah.
it's going to inspire somebody to want to learn a little bit more. Every time I read an historical fiction book, I see something that I did not know before, or I learned something that I didn't know before, and it makes me want to research it. So sometimes people aren't researching because they don't know to research it. But when they read it in a digestible format like yours, which is a fiction book, and it doesn't come across as preachy, as you said, you wanted to
Yeah,
make sure that it didn't come across as
I didn't
preachy,
want that.
it's going to inspire somebody to learn a little bit more, and they're going to read a little bit more, and they're going to learn something
Yeah,
new.
they're going to learn some of their history, and then think it also inspires people to really have important conversations about
Mhm. Yes.
issues of race and class and the things that we don't always talk about. But I think it's easier to get at the information when it is, like you said, more digestible, it's more accessible, when you can really sink into story and character. And I think it builds empathy too. People are able to walk
Yes.
in the shoes of somebody whose life is very different from their own and learn something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's not like some of the nonfiction from, say, to the summer of 2020, after the murder of George Floyd. You have
Right.
all those nonfiction anti-racism books, and those were fine, but I think for some people they felt preachy, and it's like, oh, what are you trying to accuse me of? But I think with fiction,
It's easier
it's
to
easier
digest.
to digest, and you can, yeah, yep, and when you can do it through story and character, it doesn't feel as threatening, I think, for a reader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right, right. And referring back to something that Rhonda talked about earlier with with Madam C.J. Walker, a lot of people think Rosa Parks was the first person to resist on the bus, and
Exactly.
she wasn't.
Right, right.
It was, I think her last name was Colvin.
Yeah. Claudette
Yeah,
Colvin.
Colvin.
yeah, yes.
And but Rosa Parks was the secretary for the NAACP, and she was a seamstress, I think, and so she had um, the stature
Hmm.
that they were looking for
Right,
in
and that was
terms of
planned.
representing the
That was
movement.
all part of the strategy of how they were
Yes,
Right.
going to put that out, right?
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's lots there. You have to read a lot of books to digest all the things, all the different aspects and angles, and just, but
It's
it's a good
fascinating to do,
exercise because I'm an
right?
avid reader and I'm still learning things
Yeah, and
that,
I feel like it's a good blueprint for where we are today, and it's instructive, when we're all feeling hopeless and helpless sometimes. Um,
Mm.
when, democracy is, on the line, and all civil rights and human rights and all that are being rolled back. I think we can look at these kinds of stories and look at, how was this done before? And it can be a blueprint for what we can do today, I think.
well, Nancy, we're at the end of our time. I had
Oh,
an aunt named, I
okay.
had a very, very, an aunt that I really, really was close to named Nancy. So,
Oh,
yeah. So thank you so much for being a guest on
yes.
the show.
Thank
And
you.
congratulations on your latest project.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate it. I love the conversation. So
Yeah, I
thank you.
can't wait to
Absolutely.
dig into it.
Good.
I'll be reading it as well. Thank you,
All
Nancy.
right. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, good night.
Have a good night.